We're explaining common Spring could not resolve placeholder issues and their solutions. 1. Missing property file. Spring searches for properties in files like application.properties, or application.ymln. The most frequent problem is simply forgetting to include this file in your project's resources folder, or misspelling the file name. Make sure the file is correctly placed and named. 2. Incorrect property file. Path. If your property file isn't in the default location, usually ssrc/main/resources, Spring won't find it. Double-check the path you've specified or use the correct relative path within your application context configuration. 3. Typographical errors. Even a tiny mistake in your property key, for example, database.url, versus database.urli, will prevent Spring from finding the value. Carefully review your property file and your code where placeholders are used for any typos. 4. Incorrect placeholder syntax. Ensure you're using the correct syntax for your placeholders. Common syntaxes include $property name or $property name default value for providing a default value if the property is missing. Be sure to use the right syntax consistent with your configuration type. 5. Incorrect property naming. Spring is case sensitive, so my property is different from my property. Check the case of your property names in both your property file and your code. 6. Missing dependency. Sometimes, if you're using external configuration sources like environment variables or a database, you might need to add specific dependencies to your pom.xml if using Maven, or build.gradle if using Gradle, to enable Spring to read from those sources. Check your dependencies to make sure you have everything you need for your config. 7. Circular dependency. Although less common, a circular dependency in your configuration can cause this error. This means two or more beans depend on each other in a way that creates an infinite loop. Carefully examine your bean definitions to look for any such circular relationships. 8. Profile-specific properties. If you're using Spring profiles, for example, for development, testing, production, ensure the correct profile is active and that the properties you're using are defined within that profile. Use the spring.profiles.active property to specify which profile to use. 9. Overriding properties. If you have multiple property files or configuration sources, make sure that properties aren't being unintentionally overridden. Pay attention to the order in which Spring loads properties, as later properties can override earlier ones. 10. Caching issues. Sometimes, Spring's internal cache can cause problems. Restarting your application can resolve issues related to cached incorrect configuration data. In development environments, disabling caching might be helpful for quicker debugging. Remember to address the root cause instead of relying solely on restarts. By systematically checking these points, you should be able to identify and fix most could not resolve placeholder errors in your Spring application.